Welcome, everybody, to the Table Rush Talk Show, where we dive deep into the world of entrepreneurship, marketing, and personal growth. I'm your host, Mischa Zvegintzov, and today we have Travis Chappell, founder of Guestio and host of the Build Your Network podcast. Actually, it's not the Build Your Network podcast. It is might start over. Where to go? I don't know where that came from.
Newly updated Travis Makes Friends podcast. Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, there we go. Hey, you know what? We're just going to keep rolling with this. This is live action. This is how it works.
That is how it works.
Yes, Travis Makes Friends podcast. Travis, you have helped countless creators, entrepreneurs, and top executives build credibility and trust with their ideal audiences through strategic, impactful connections. Whether you're looking to bring high caliber guests onto your show or elevate your influence, Travis has the insights to take your networking game to the next level. Travis, welcome to the show.
Mischa, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, super excited to have you here. I actually cold pitched you to be on your show, Travis Makes Friends. And you said, if you'd like to do the sponsored, what did you call it?
We have a sponsored guest package now. Yeah.
The sponsored guest package. Yeah. And I was like, no, how about an interview swap in lieu of the sponsored guest package? And you're like, we're pretty booked up. And I said, well, I'd love to have you on my show anyway, after I did a little digging. So you've got Guestio, which looks like an awesome platform to help podcast hosts easily get guests and then help guests easily get on shows. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you nailed it.
Okay.
I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's basically it, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So, how do you like to say what you do?
You know, I usually just lead with I'm a podcaster because that's how this all got started, so had I not jumped into the podcasting world, I would not be in the business that I'm in. It's just basically I was just trying to figure out a way to do it full time. I was sick of doing what I was doing at the time, and I wanted to figure out how to make money online. And the podcast was kind of my first venture into that world. And I quickly realized that monetizing through sponsorships is not possible when you're first starting with podcasts unless you already have a massive following. So I was like, well, what else can I offer to these people in the meantime so that I can build some sort of a business that allows me to actually do what I really want to do full time, which is get in the podcasting world. So started multiple businesses just in the podcasting space so that I could continue to be in that world.
Awesome. And I did a little bit of digging, and it looks like you got married fairly young, were to be involved in the ministries, did things like that, went to a church college. I'm not saying that wrong or right, excuse.
No, that's correct. No, that's correct. I essentially grew up in some people would call it a cult. I call it a cult sometimes just because it's easier to get people to know what I mean by that. Because saying I grew up religious, like it doesn't completely encapsulate the way that I grew up. I graduated kindergarten, 8th grade, high school, and college on one campus, which is also where my church was. So pretty much 7 days a week for 20 years, I spent my life there on this 40-acre compound in Southern California. So the only real option that was presented to us growing up for like what to do with the rest of your life is one of two things, either ministry or not ministry. You know what I mean? So it was either like you either go into ministry or like, if you're not going to ministry, good luck. There was no career counselor that was like, hey, you want to be an engineer, you might need to have these grades and apply to these schools. It was none of that. It was basically, they were trying to churn out, ministry people. And then as soon as you declared for ministry, there was no like, okay, well, there's 6 different schools to look at and here's the advantages or whatever. It was basically just like, here's an application to the college that's on this campus, because why would you go anywhere else? It's the best one, So that's what I did. And in that world, in that culture, you get married young and you churn out kids and you get into ministry. So there's a lot of societal pressure to get married young. Luckily, I found a good one. So we're actually still married to this day, even through like a lot of belief changes and a lot of value changes over the years. But we met in She moved down to where I was going to church and school. She moved down there in ninth grade. And so we went to all of high school and college together. And then we started dating senior year of high school, got married senior year of college, and then, started life.
So I definitely can't wait to get into what you do business-wise, what you are doing with Guestio, how cool your podcast is. I listened to an episode 961, a psychiatrist advice for making friends, but you used your mini view tool, which I can't wait to have you talk about that, how you came up with that. But before we get on to all that, I'm just trying to, what do we call that, pre-frame or create an open loop for our listeners and viewers. But before we get into that, I want to hear, I've got a great question for you, but everybody watching, listening, go to guestio.com, 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 and you can follow along with what Travis does. You can go to the About page and you can dig more on about Travis and the things we're talking about right now. You're really cool youth, which at the time probably didn't seem cool when that tension was there and you're like, wait a minute, I'm in a cult. I'm in too deep. My question to you is, you and your current wife, so you meet in the ministry, yes?
Yeah, in ninth grade. Yeah, we met at that school. Yeah, so she had grown up in that same movement, what would be called the Independent Fundamental Baptist movement, which is a small sect of Baptists in that world. Like we would not have associated or quote unquote fellowshipped with even Southern Baptists. Like Southern Baptists were too liberal for our standards. So the IFB movement as a whole, she grew up in that same movement, just in a different part of the country. But the church that I went to was kind of like the mega church of that world. So, there was probably, by the time I left, there's probably like 7,000, 8,000 members of the church. They had a K through 12 school, a publication ministry, a ministerial college. They had several multi-million-dollar buildings on a 40-acre campus that had started essentially from scratch. So that was kind of like the place to be in that world. So her and her family moved down there when her brother enrolled in the college. Her and her family moved down there ninth grade. So we met in ninth grade and then started dating. We went to all of high school together there and all of college together there. Started dating senior year of high school.
Are you guys speaking in tongues and stuff like that?
No. So speaking in tongues would be more charismatic churches.
Okay.
Would be like Pentecostal churches would be more speaking in tongues. IFB that was one of the groups, one of the many groups that we would not associate with and that we would think were definitely wrong.
Yeah, and I was asking that authentically and openly. Like I did not grow up. My upbringing was middle class pagan heathens.
Right. So quite the opposite of me. Yeah.
Yeah, quite the opposite. So I got clean and sober when I was 17. By the time I was 17, I was already a raging alcoholic and thoroughly addicted to drugs. Partially due to I would say the lack of spirituality, the lack of God source, that type of thing. Again, pagan heathens, but that's
sure.
But a little nudge from the judge, I like to say, I was offered a choice of jail for 6 months or treatment. And by the grace of God, I got sentenced to what I like to say a spiritual awakening. So I dive into treatment and the 12-step modalities, but really that's my entry point into spirituality and God or higher powers or those sorts of things. And I love it. And I'm still very involved in recovery and service and mentoring alcoholics and addicts who are trying to get sober. But just to give you the frame, so I authentically, there's so much available in the churches, I believe. I don't enter traditionally, you know what I mean? Yeah. So, I guess quick, are you well, I have a bunch of questions. First one would be, your parents were obviously, what was the acronym you used? ICPs or something?
IFB. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So IFB. So your parents, you just are born into that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Essentially, yeah. So with my parents, I've put in a good amount of thought into this. So they would still be practicing Christians, but they're not really. They were never like fully bought into the IFB movement as a whole. I think for them, they were just more looking. They were searching for community as young adults. They had young kids and they were searching for community, and they wanted that community to be one of strong Christian based values. But like before going to that church, they were just kind of like, they were quote unquote Christians, but like the way that most people would associate with being a Christian. You go on Easter, you go on Christmas, and then you might go a few Sundays throughout the year, but that's about it. But in the IFB world, we would label that as like a lukewarm Christian, like a community church Christian would not be a real Christian. So I think that there was just I think that they didn't really fully understand or realize how much indoctrination was going on, at the school, in our Sunday school classes, and all the things that they were not involved in. And then there's a big difference between being indoctrinated into a belief system when you're 30 and being indoctrinated into a belief system when you're 3. One of them is a completely clean slate where they can write the code of your mind to fit whatever they think the truth is. Whereas, if you're 30, you have the ability to think critically, at least to a certain degree, and basically be able to take the information that's given to you and be like, yeah, but not really. Yeah, or yeah, if I agree with 90% of what that guy said, but like 10%, I'm not like, I don't fully get on board with that. But when you grow up in it, you take everything at face value. And you even start getting like that pious mentality, even towards your parents or toward people who aren't as active in everything as you are. So I think that in retrospect, I think that they didn't fully realize or comprehend what was going on in our minds as like young kids growing up in that sheltered of an environment. But now that like today, they would still be like professing Christians, where I am not. But yeah, there was some strain on our relationship, obviously, for some period of time because of that. But they're my parents, and we've worked through a lot of that. So
Amazing. That's very mature. A lot of parents and kids never do. So I'm not sure how old you are. I'm 56 as of this recording. What, your mid 30s maybe?
32. Yep.
Yeah, 32. So that's a mature thing to do. I think a lot of times kids will play that victim card for their whole lives, or parents will still try to be hyper controlling of their kids.
Sure.
Right? So that's cool.
Both of them can exist. Yeah, I think I was kind of jaded to that mentality because I saw people leave that world when I was still in that world and engage in just self-destructive activity. And so when I was leaving, I felt like I at least had some sort of warning signs or had some sort of thoughtful approach to leaving, to where I was still able to stand on moral ground. I was able to still base my decisions and values that I held closely without losing touch of all, reality or right and wrong, which is not something that most people like. If you're taught that all things right and wrong are based in this foundation of like the Bible or whatever, and then you grow up to abandon the foundation of the Bible or the church or Christianity or God or whatever, I watched people just, like I said, for lack of a better term, destroy their life or destroy their 20s at least, because they didn't have any ground to stand on. That foundation was destroyed, and they mistook that for complete freedom and autonomy, being able to do whatever you want to do outside of the bounds of any sort of value system. And then I think that they paid the price for it. So like I said, I was lucky enough to come out of it with some sort of a head on my shoulders to understand that like that's also not the path forward, to abandon all truth, to abandon all all morality, all versions of right and wrong, all value systems. Like I knew at least that was probably a bad idea. So now it's just more up to me what I believe to be those valuable things, rather than outsourcing it to some religious hierarchy.
Cool. So you pull away from the parents, from the church. And obviously, I mean, by genetic design, do you have kids yet?
I do. Yeah. 5-year-old and well, my daughter's about to be 4. So 5-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Amazing. You're in the thick of it. I have 2 boys who are now 21 and 23 years old, Cooper and Waylon. But when they were teens, especially Cooper, you know, male teenagers are designed to genetically pull away from the nest, and there can be tension in that regard. So the kids pull away, they come back, hopefully. You pull away from your parents, you come back. So it sounds like there's some tension as you leave, but any fractured relationship with the parents has long been healed, and you guys might still have some Sunday dinner together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like we just, for a while, we just didn't talk about it. For a while, we just didn't address it. And then it just kind of came to a head, not in a bad way, just there were certain things that I was doing that my parents did not appreciate or did not like that I was doing. And especially my dad just didn't like things that I was doing with my life. And so that caused some tension, and it just caused me to not want to talk about it because I knew that we weren't going to agree. And so I just didn't talk about it. And then eventually we ended up just having like a 3 or 4 hour conversation one night a few years ago. And just to be like, this is where I am and this is how I feel about it. And I think that I have a lot of valid reasons to end up on the page that I ended up on. And I'm happy to answer any questions type of a thing. You know what I mean? So we definitely addressed it. And I know that it's obviously not the direction that they wanted me to go in when it comes to that one particular thing. But at the end of the day, I'm blessed to still have a relationship with my parents because I do have friends that grew up the same way I grew up who left and just completely got alienated by the people that are closest to them, including their parents. So I'm lucky to still have a great relationship with them.
Yeah, that's cool. That's awesome. I'm so fascinated by about this dynamic. And I definitely want to make sure that we have time to talk about what you do. I mean, your podcast, Travis Makes Friends, you've got 5 million downloads, 20 million video views, 900 episodes. So what you're doing is very powerful there. Like I said, I listened to that one episode, 961, a psychiatrist's advice for making friends as an adult, with Dr. Judith Joseph. And I'll be perfectly honest with you. I sort of prejudged perhaps the type of person you were by your look, as we can do as humans. And then I listened to that episode and I was struck. It's very thoughtful. You're a very thoughtful dude. And so I very much appreciate that about
Thank you.
So, yeah. Anybody watching, listening should definitely go to Travis Makes Friends and check out your podcast because you're thoughtful, good stuff to learn about life, not only marketing, all these things, but you cover some really cool topics. Anyway, all that aside, I am curious, in 30 seconds or less, you said something. You said, hey, my parents didn't like the things that you were doing. 30 seconds or less. What does that mean? Or what were you doing? Did you like go complete opposite? I'm going, pagan lifestyle or
No,
lifestyle
not necessarily.
choices? Yeah.
It's just when you're that strict, doing anything that's outside of the rule book is frowned upon. So like just the activity of drinking a beer was one that was frowned upon.
Shook them up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very much so.
Iced coffee. They're like, what are you doing?
Yeah, very much so. It was very like, whoa, what's happening? And it was never even like an abusive relationship that I had with it. It was like the first time my dad saw me drink was I had a Bud Light with my grandpa in his kitchen after we golfed together. And that was enough for him to be like, I gotta leave. I can't watch this type of a thing, so like drinking, cussing, smoking cigars. Like I never smoked cigarettes, but I smoked cigars. Like any of those things, growing up, it was all of those things were demonized. Obviously, like you can't touch any of those things. If you do, like, you would not be accepted into the church type of a thing if you were doing any of those things or got caught doing any of those things. So yeah, like things that are fairly vanilla were high points of tension for quite some time.
Yeah. quick, I was going to say ministry work. So you're going to this ministry school, college, what
Mhm.
have you. Did you do ministry work? You've got a great chunk of your earlier life is sales history, or you were a salesman
Yep.
doing door-to-door sales. It looks like had some teams. Did you do ministry work that laid the foundation for that, or?
So growing up that way, you're always doing ministry work. Like we were knocking on doors and quote unquote soul winning is what we called it, which is basically just inviting people to come to church and, you know, leading them to Jesus on their doorstep if they'll allow you type of a thing, you know. I was doing that since I was a kid. But also growing up, like I served in the bus ministry from like ninth grade through freshman year of college. So we had buses that would go out every Sunday morning and pick up kind of underprivileged kids from the area and take them to church. And so I did that every Sunday morning for, 4 years, 5 years. So whenever there was conferences or anything like that, we were always engaging in some sort of ministry. I was in the music ministry and did a lot of, singing and all these types of things. And then I was in preaching camp when I was 12, which is basically just a college level course teaching you how to like prepare and preach sermons. So I did that when I was 12 and 13 and 14 and was in preaching contests. So like the whole time you're doing ministry the entire time you're growing up. It was just that going to college was the next step to go into quote unquote full-time ministry. So my bachelor's degree is a double major in Bible and church ministries, and I was going to be a youth pastor afterwards. But I had an internship in college at a church. And on the weekends, we would drive down to this church. I was in Southern California, so we drive a couple hours down to Newport Beach and do this internship at a church on the weekends. But during the week, that was when I started doing door-to-door sales. And I would find myself itching to get back to school from the internship so that I could do my sales job because I really enjoyed it. And I didn't enjoy the internship at all. And I was like, that was kind of like when it started being like, oh my gosh, am I really like, I'm supposed to be quitting this job in like 6 months when I graduate so that I can do that job that I don't want to do. And it started raising a lot of questions in my mind about, am I doing the right thing? Is this, Satan just tempting me to not be in ministry? All those things start coming top of mind. And those were the things that I was wrestling with when I was graduating college and getting married.
Wow, what a man to grow up in that environment where there's a definite hardcore devil, and am I being tempted by the devil? I mean, that's pretty intense. That's a heavy place to be. Have you, hmm, I don't want to say disconnected from that, because now as I get older and I slowly strip away all the shiny objects that tempt me, I'm like, I start thinking more and more, is that just the devil tempting me? Or, is my
Yeah,
thinking the devil? Or, right, is the ego the devil? Or go ahead,
sure.
riff on that for a sec if you want.
Yeah, I still am a believer in spirituality at large. I just personally don't believe that there is an actual being named Lucifer who is out to destroy my life type of a thing. Like I don't believe in the personification of the values, but I do
Yeah.
believe in, good energy versus bad energy, and that some things are distractions and will pull you away from things that you're meant to be doing. I just think that it's up to you to define what those things are, not up to everybody else. And that was the problem at that time, was that everybody else was defining what I should be doing with my life. And then I just kind of woke up and realized this one day, just hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was going to take this ministry job out of college that I didn't want to do. And I started realizing that it was really just so that I could save face with all of the people that I really respected from the world that I grew up in, the leaders, the pastors, the youth pastors, all the people that I looked up to my entire life growing up there. I didn't want them to be disappointed in me, and I wanted to, I wanted them to look at me in a positive light. And so I started thinking about it more, and I was like, we're going to come back to this campus because, like I said, that was like the mega church of the movement. So we that church would host the youth conferences and the leadership conferences and the ministry conferences and all these other things. And so even though I would go serve somewhere else, we would always, probably 2 or 3 times a year, we probably would be back there for some sort of a conference or whatever. And I started realizing that it just kind of hit me one day where I was just like, I'm going to be back on this campus like 6, 7 days a year. And I'm going to live the other 358 or 359 days of the year doing something that I don't want to do just to save face for those 6 or 7 days, that doesn't make any sense. Like I'm the only person on this planet that has to wake up every single day and be me. So I probably should start making decisions that are best suited for what's going to fulfill me and make me happy and create a life worth living based on my definition of that, not based on what everybody tells me should be a life worth living.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. I love how you clearly the classes, the how to give a sermon, or I can't remember what you said, those classes you were taking at 8th or ninth grade. I should have noted them, but how
Yeah,
that really,
preaching camp. Yeah, it was preaching camp was what it was. It was like literally like a week long in the summer, like you would go to summer camp or whatever. But it was just done at the college. But it was a homiletics course from the college. So when you get into the Bible college, you take homiletics 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're how to preach. Essentially, homiletics is like the study of preaching. And so it was a college level homiletics course that they taught in 7 days. So we would be in class like 8 hours a day, and then at the end of it, we prepared a sermon and we'd preach it.
wow.
So that was the first time I did that when I was 12.
That's amazing, man, and how it laid the foundation for you, and how you could take all these. I mean, at the time, intense. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you love some of it, love-hate relationship with lots of it. We can move past that, but I just think it's really cool how the foundational things you learned you could bring forward into what you're doing today. Obviously, I'm looking
Excellent.
I'm looking at the about section at travischappell.com, TravisChappell.com, about anybody watching, listening, and you can see what I'm talking about. But searching for answers and discovering what I was good at. Let's dive into the discovering what I was good at. Like, talk to me about that part of your life. And how it's
Yeah,
important.
most people coming out of college are actively looking for work in the field that they studied in college. I was coming out of college realizing that I didn't want to be in the line of work that I went to college for, which was bad enough. But worse than that was that my degree was quite literally as useless as the paper it was printed on. First of all, because
I'm laughing with you. Go.
Yeah, it was a Bible and church ministries double major. Like that's already useless, but to add on top of that, it was unaccredited. So it was quite literally like, even if I wanted to go to school after that and get and major in something different, a regular college wouldn't take any of my credits. Like I would have to start from scratch and get another 4-year degree, even though I just completed a 4-year degree. And so at that time, I was just like, what am I going to do? Like I'm not going into this world at all. And now that I'm leaving this world, nobody from that world cares to like help me be successful. So I'm basically on my own at this point, except for the fact that I bought a house and I have a wife. So I have a mortgage, I have bills to pay, I have responsibilities. I have a wife, I'm 21. I can't just like bum it on my buddy's couch until I figure things out. So the options were like, go get a job, in which didn't sound good to me at all, because it was like, what am I going to make? What am I going to do? I'm going to like go work for somebody that I probably don't respect or like. I'm going to make like 30 grand a year to have somebody else dictate my schedule. It was just like, this doesn't sound good at all. So I had done door to door in college and it did pretty well. So that was just what I did, because that was all I knew how to do. And I knew at least at that point that I'd have a little bit of freedom, flexibility, and autonomy, and that I could increase my earning power. So that was the first year I made 6 figures. I was like 22, 23 years old, and I was doing 100% commission door-to-door sales. And, but I made 6 figures, and I did it in like 20, 25-hour work weeks, which was counterintuitive at the end of the year, because most 20 somethings would be stoked about that. But I got to the end of the year and realized that I didn't want to be doing it forever. And so I immediately started looking for like other career paths, alternate career paths, while still doing door to door, obviously, because still got to pay the bills. But also I was actively pursuing something else. And this is like really where I had my kind of come to Jesus moment, where I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, except for I was 23. Most people are doing that when they're 14, and there's no stakes. but there were stakes for me, and I had to figure something out quickly. But I was literally looking at everything, man. Like I looked at like FBI applications. I looked at the fire department. I looked at real estate. There was nothing off the table. I was like legitimately being like, what do I want to do with my life? And that was when I came across personal development and podcasting for the first time. And I started listening to podcasts, started reading books, listening to audiobooks, which was out of character for me. I'd never really been into like self-education. I was not a reader at all growing up. And it was well known within my family that I wasn't. So, but something happens when you feel like your back's against the wall. It's like you're either the type of person to just run and hide, or you're the type of person to figure it out. And I didn't really have any other option. So I just tried to figure it out. And that was what my first introduction to the podcasting world was just being an avid listener. And I was listening to a bunch of shows and trying to figure things out, and realized that I wanted to go into the business world. And so I started a podcast a year and a half after I started listening to them. And that's what's led to everything else.
What year did you start your podcast?
2017.
2017. And you start your podcast, you realize quickly, wait a minute, I can't sell ads. It's not as easy as I thought. Or I
Correct.
need a lot of downloads. It's hard to grow a podcast. So talk to me. Let's talk the arc of your podcast.
Yeah. So at that time I was still doing door to door. It was a blessing in disguise for me, because it was a skill set that I had that was highly monetizable, but also extremely flexible. So whenever I would make big investments into my podcast, like building a website or hiring a coach or joining a mastermind group to learn what I didn't know about it, anything like that, I could offset the cost by just going out and knocking more doors and selling. But I could also take a week or two off and not do that at all and focus on the podcast, but make the money for the month in the first couple of weeks, because I would just go ham on doors. So when I realized that the show itself was not going to be producing anything for monetization on sponsors, I started researching other ways to start making money. And that's when I started building like online products, online businesses, and creating my first sort of like offers in that space. And the podcast was just basically became my lead source, the top of funnel for me. And I was only getting, 150 downloads an episode or something like that. But it was highly targeted. It was about the show used to be called Build Your Network. So it was very much about networking, very much about like connecting with other people. And so I built products that would help solve that problem just a little bit further down the line. The product, the show was the free version, and then the product was the paid version. And I started being able to bring people into some of those products. And within about a little bit over a year of doing the show, I was able to stop doing door to door completely and just go full time into the online business. Now, it was the first time, it sounds sexier than it was, because it was the first time I'd ever taken a massive pay cut to do something different. But I was so done with door to door that I was okay with it. So we broke we were leasing this really nice place at the time. And so we broke that lease. We moved in with my brother-in-law in a 2-bedroom apartment to cut all of our living expenses like down like crazy. And I was making like $3,500, maybe $4,000 a month or something at that point. But it was enough for me to be able to justify the decision to not have to knock doors anymore and just focus fully on how I was going to make money online. And then that was the kind of the beginning. And then that next year, I think my revenue in that went from like 50K to like 200K to like 500K, and just every year started getting a little bit better. And then led into different business models and different business types over the years.
So you're talking revenue. So are you doing paid ads, paid listeners, or paid promotions? So
no, it was all products. It was all like masterminds or courses or all products that were related to the topic of the show. But the only one I was monetizing.
As far as, are you doing paid traffic to so you?
Oh, no, that was all from the podcast.
Okay, cool. So it's strictly organic traffic from the podcast coming in.
From my podcast and from going to be a guest on other podcasts as well.
Cool. And then that's amazing. So when does your when and has your podcast shifted from being top of funnel to now it's no, now it's more, I've got all these downloads, so you
Yeah.
have a ton of ads, so people are obviously paying you for ads. You're doing sponsored guest fees. Talk to me about that arc, that change.
Yeah. So I essentially just got bored with the topic. I did over 800 episodes of Build Your Network and just got bored, burnt out, was tired of talking about it, wanted to talk to more, um, a broader variety of people on the show, more comedians, athletes, entertainers, like just anybody who I was interested in talking to. But the topic of like networking just wasn't something that it was a limiting factor in being able to land some of these guests because they would see the name of the show and be like, that's just not my vibe. I don't want to do it. So beginning of 2023, we rebranded the show from Build Your Network to Travis Makes Friends. And it allowed me to go really broad with the audience, really broad with the topics. The downside was that the audience shrunk a little bit at first, and it was the audience wasn't as loyal. That like the fan base wasn't as like rabid because I wasn't helping solve like one core problem that they could come to me and repeatedly get answers to. So when you go broader, it becomes more difficult to grow, and then you're kind of working against that factor. So, but like to me at the same time, like I just knew if I kept going on the networking thing that I was just going to quit. I was just like, I'm not going to keep talking about this. So
Yeah.
the change is what enabled me to be able to kind of shed that skin and grow in a different direction. And so that's when we started really spending more time focusing on growing the actual downloads of the show and then monetizing through sponsorships, to where now like the show by itself is like its own kind of business, its own product essentially that's packaged to sell sponsors and ads and sponsored guest spots and stuff like that. And so it kind of operates now as its own separate business. It's not really a lead gen thing for my businesses anymore because the topics don't really match. It kind of acts as its own entity.
Love it. So your focus changes in 2023. You're like, I'm bored with this. Let's change the theme of the podcast. I love that. It iterates, and now you're going to focus on growing downloads, selling ads, sponsored guest spots. So let's start with in 30 seconds or less, like your strategy for growing downloads.
Really simple. To boil it down to 30 seconds or less, I spend money on advertising. That's really it. Like if you want to purposefully grow downloads on your show, the number one thing you can do is spend money on acquiring downloads and subscribers. The problem is that it's expensive. So if you don't have income coming in from another source, you're not going to be able to back out of your ad costs quickly enough to justify it. So you got to be willing to just dump money down the drain for a year. You know what I mean? Like it's just not going to work out. Like you're going to be acquiring at a higher CPM than you can sell ads on your show for. So it's not, the numbers aren't going to back out until you like reach a certain threshold, like 10,000, 15,000 downloads an episode. Then you start be able to monetize to the degree where you have a little bit of money left over, and that profit, then you can dump that into more ads. And then, so that's kind of what we do now is like, I've never taken a dime from my show. Any money that I make on it, I dump it directly back into advertising the show to increase downloads.
Amazing. Where are you mainly advertising your show?
Being a guest on other shows is a great way. And you can, run campaigns to be a guest on other shows, which is what my company does. And then we acquire downloads through like banner ads on various websites, as well as banner ads on specific podcast media players. So like Spotify and Apple are the two most well-known ones, obviously, but there's 2 or 3 dozen other different like smaller media player apps that have a user base of a couple million or something like that use them specifically to listen to podcasts, and they'll sell ads to podcasters to like place your show in front of people who are discovering new shows on those platforms. So we buy ads over there. And then the last one is we buy sponsor spots on other shows. So you can go to a show and just be like a regular business advertiser, except for you're not advertising your business, you're advertising your podcast.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Sponsored guest spots are 100% of your guests via sponsored guest spots now?
No, only inbound. So I have a list of people that I want to get on my show, and I'm constantly trying to attack that list. 80% of my guests are from that list, are from me reaching out to guests. Any sponsored guests come from inbound requests. So like the one that you sent, I get probably at least 100 of those every month for 4 guest spots that I have available.
Okay.
So, and it's not to say that people who reach out are less interesting or something. It's just a volume thing. It's like we have 100 people trying to get these 4 guest spots, 3 of which are going to be taken by people who I reach out to. So really it's only one available guest spot that we have for 100 different people. And a lot of people are really qualified. There's a lot of great people, a lot of people running great businesses, or they're authors and they have a great book, or they have a good personal brand. It's just that for whatever reason at that time, like it's not a conversation that I'm super interested in having. So it's just like, well, happy to bring you on the show, but only if you sponsor the episode. If you sponsor the episode, then I will do my best to like bring people into your world and pitch your product or service to my audience. Because that was kind of the thing that we started to realize was like, well, people aren't just pitching to be on my show out of the goodness of their heart because they want to add value to my audience. You know what I mean? It's like there's an obvious play. You know what I mean? And I'm not disparaging that. We do that all the time too. But the obvious play is that you want to get in front of my audience so that you can bring people into your world and they could potentially buy your products and services. Cool. I'm all right with that. That's totally fine with me. But if I spent the time and like the sheer volume of money, time, and energy that I've spent creating and curating my show and building an audience over the last 7 years is like, I think I deserve to be compensated for that. So if you want to come get in front of my audience and get exposure to my audience, great. I'm totally on board. But just like you would have to pay to get in front of Meta's audience, or you have to pay to get in front of YouTube's audience or Google's audience or billboards or whatever, like anywhere where there's audience, you have to pay to get in front of that audience. I think that you should be, I think that most people should be willing to pay podcasters for the audience, especially if you're getting on for the specific purpose of trying to sell a product or service. So that's why we have that. And then, like I said, it's also the gatekeeping thing. It's just like, if I got 3 reach outs a month, I might not do it. It's just that we have so many people reaching out now. So it's really easy just to throw that email back and be like, happy to do it. It starts at $3,000 to do a sponsored virtual guest spot on the show. And that, yeah, like 90% of people just end up saying no to that, which fine, you know, totally fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty cool that you make a spot available for $3,000 a month. Some people love the pay to play and would prefer to do that anyway. They can line item it and be like, let me on your show, give me access to your audience. Sounds
yeah, that's it. Like, and those people typically have something specific they're trying to sell, and it's usually not something cheap. You know, they stand to make good money on it. It's like, well, they're going to sell a $20,000 coaching package or something, or they're going to sell a $15,000 whatever water machine, or like they have something to sell that's not cheap and they want to get in front of my audience to sell it. And it's like, okay, great. I'm on board. But like, you pay to get exposure to that audience, just like you do literally anywhere else. You know, the problem is that like traditional media got conflated with podcasting, and they're not the same at all. So people are calling it payola, you know, oh, it's payola. It's like, but it's like, no. These are 2 wildly different things. You know, like paying a staff journalist to write an article about you on the side, that's payola, because that person's getting paid a salary from a publication to have journalistic integrity and build the story based on their interest in the story. And if you're paying them, there's a conflict of interest there. That is like obvious to look at. From a podcaster perspective, we're all indies. We're all independent people just running shows, trying to make it happen. And most people stop running their show before 10 episodes come out, because it's really difficult to do everything related to building your own show, especially when you realize that it costs you money. It doesn't make you a dime. So I think if more people are willing to pay for those spots, like my overall point is just like comparing independent podcasters to like staff journalists at Forbes or whatever is a wild comparison. It just does not, the math doesn't math on that, you know?
That's clearly a tender spot for you. And I love it. Hey, we got to take time to jump into Guestio.com, because clock's ticking, and Guestio.com, Guestio.com. tell me about it. Like,
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I'm kind of passionate about talking about that is because of Guestio, because we were kind of the first people in the space to start popularizing this idea. Basically, like what I saw happening was I saw a bunch of agencies that were popping up, and we have an agency too. I'm not demonizing agencies. They do great work. But what I realized was happening was that everybody was making money in the transaction except for the podcaster. It was like the person who's taking, like, you know how much time goes into building a show.
God.
You know what I mean? So the agency represents a guest, and that they come to you and they say, Mischa, we have a great guest for your show, and we want to place them on your show. And you look at their bio and you go, okay, great, I'll take that guest. So the guest comes on the show, and the guest sells something to your audience. Obviously, that's the only reason they hired an agency to begin with, is they're trying to sell something. Again, I'm fine with that. I'm a capitalist through and through. Totally cool. But you're going to come to this person's audience, sell to their audience. So the guest is going to make money from the transaction. The guest is also paying the agency to do the work for them. So, and typically it's around $500 to $1,000 per booking. So the agency is going to make money from the guest on the transaction. The only person who doesn't make any money from the appearance is the person doing 95% of the work and investing 95% of the money and energy. So I was like, if people are willing to spend money to go get booked on podcasts because they want the exposure, shouldn't that money go to the podcaster rather than just going directly to an agency? So it's like, yeah, we have an agency. And so for some people, it makes sense. If they are running an 8-figure business, they shouldn't be going and booking their own podcast. And it makes more sense for them to pay us $4,000 or $5,000 a month to go earn them appearances because we have a bunch of existing connections and we know what we're doing. So for those people, it's fine. But for some people that are just like trying to get, their podcasting legs under them, and they're trying to get some exposure to small audiences because they're just starting their business, it's like they don't have the money to spend on a good agency. And if they're going to drop anywhere near $500 an appearance, it probably should just go to the podcaster, because the podcaster might take $50 for it. You know what I'm saying? It's a better deal for the guest. It's a much better deal for the podcaster because they can actually recoup some of the cost that it takes them to produce their show. And then it cuts out the middleman. So Guestio was built as a marketplace for people to go purchase interviews from guests as well as purchase interviews on podcasts. So we're introducing a subscription tier to be able to like pitch for free and things like that. But there's several podcasters on there that are like, they're $10 or $25, $50 for an appearance. And they have, 175 downloads an episode. So it's like, well, it's not that many people, but also if you were to get an opportunity to go speak to 150 people, most people would say yes to that opportunity. It's 150 people that you didn't get exposure to before, and you can get it for $25. Like, yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good deal. You know what I mean? So that's why we built Guestio.
Amazing. So if I'm hearing you correctly, and I totally missed this, it's a marketplace for me to sell my interview slots.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. You as a podcaster can sign up, list your show, and get paid for guest spots on your show.
And then you're taking a commission of...
Yep. Guestio takes 20% of whatever's done in the marketplace.
Free to sign up?
Free to sign up.
Well, that is pretty stinking awesome. When did you start this thing?
About 3 years ago.
And you're having fun with it. It's working. It's paying some bills.
Yes, sir. Yep. Yeah. We raised about a $1.3 million seed round right after we started the company, which was obviously extremely beneficial for us to have some runway and get the software built, because it's expensive to build software if you're not a tech person. Yeah, it's been going well.
I have, according to listennotes.com, let's say someone has 100 downloads. Most people who have podcasts, I mean, the bulk of them out there, even if you've been around for a long time, you might have 100 to 500 downloads a month. Let's be real, right? I personally see the value myself of speaking on that podcast, even if they only have 50 listeners a month. Whatever, you get what I'm saying. I mean, the list of benefits over and above somebody actually just clicking on the call to action that I give at the end. Go to guestingguide.com. Well, gosh, I'm getting content, I'm getting exposure, I'm building my thought leadership. I mean, boom, 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 all these things, opportunities to leverage people's email lists if there's
Yep.
simpatico or we're on the same page,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yep.
So for
Yep.
me personally, I'm like, wow, that's pretty awesome. Point is, what could a guy that has 500 downloads a month expect to be able to charge or get?
Yeah. What I tell people is like, for guesting spots, think about it about $100 CPM. So if you're getting 1,000 downloads an episode, then I would charge $100 for that guest spot.
Love it.
If you're getting 500, it's $50. If you're getting 200, it's $20. But yeah, like if you're like kind of just starting out, I would just list it at like $25.
Yeah.
Because like you said, most people understand like it's not just exposure to the audience, it's also the content you get from it. So like if you're a host that's a thoughtful host that asks good questions, that hosts well, $25 is just, it's nothing. And like I said, people are spending thousands of dollars on agencies to go land them these appearances that are net average costing them $500, $600 a pop. So for them just to come directly to the podcaster and pay $25, it's like, well, like I said, if you're paying $200 a month to produce your show or $400 a month to produce your show, and you can start making a little bit of money back on that to do interviews with people who you would already say yes to regardless, that's a good deal,
How many people do you have offering podcast interviews on there?
A couple thousand now.
Amazing. You're telling me that my listeners right now can log in, can sign up for free at guestio.com as somebody who's wanting to be a guest. And I can go start guest speaking on podcasts for $10 to $50 to $100.
Correct.
That is freaking amazing.
Yeah. And the money goes to the podcaster, which is where it should go.
Gosh, you might be my new favorite,
Podcasters love us. Podcasters love us.
Yeah. So, quick question. What's my next quick question here? I know we're running on a time constraint, so I want to be cognizant of that. Do you have time to go a few more minutes here, or do we need to hit stop?
I got about 2 more minutes here.
Okay, amazing. Other things that's the core functionality of Guestio. Anything else that you want to highlight on Guestio?
There's one cool feature that I think we built recently that you alluded to earlier. So I'll mention that. It's the mini view. So you can, if you have an account in Guestio, you can just go create a mini view, name the mini view, and then you can just type out. You can also record video or audio of the questions, but you can just type out questions, up to 10 questions. And then once you save that, you can copy that link and send it to anybody that you want, and they can go in on their own time and record answers to each of those questions. And it gets saved into your back end. So that way you can go download the answers to those questions and create micro content or plug it into. So like that episode you listened to today with Dr. Judith, I just basically took her answers and plugged it to an episode, added some context, and turned it into a 20-minute episode. Whereas like if I was trying to sit down and interview her and ask her all those questions, we'd have to set up a time and we have to jump on a call, and we got to do what we're doing right now, which is just much more logistically complicated. So this just allows you to be able to potentially interview people that maybe you wouldn't have been able to interview them because they're just way too busy and they can't ever get something on the schedule, and you've been trying for 6 months, but you can put 5 to 7 high impact questions on a mini view, send them the link, and then they can just answer it when they're in the back of an Uber on the way to a hotel. And now you have quote unquote interviewed that person. You can share that content on social and, create an episode fully around that content. So the mini view feature is something I think is pretty cool.
Amazing. A comment and a question around that question quickly is, you can create this mini view and you can send it to people outside of Guestio. So I could,
correct.
Okay, that's amazing. Number 2 comment on that is that I listened to your episode, that episode that we're referencing. Anyone watching, listening, go to episode 961 on Travis Makes Friends, and you can hear how she answered the question, and she might have answered 4 questions, but you very beautifully put context around it and recorded all this, like this post-production context. It's awesome. So very well done.
Thank you.
Hey, this has been a ton of fun. I want to be cognizant of your time. It's a great place to hit stop, and we'll say a quick goodbye offline.
Sweet. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Table Rush Talk Show. For resources to help you sell your stuff, go to belove.media/resources. That's beloved.media/resources. And be sure to subscribe, comment, 5-star, and share. Thank you again for listening.